General Maya Trenton stopped at a gas station to take a classified call from the Pentagon, but within minutes, two local white cops had her pinned and handcuffed, accusing her of being suspicious for standing alone and looking serious. They ignored her military ID, dismissed her rank, and treated her like a criminal. What they didn't know, she outranked nearly everyone in the state. So what happens when the system tries to silence the wrong woman? Let us know what you think. And now let's get into the full story. They say some uniforms you never take off. General Maya Trenton knew that better than anyone. Even in sneakers and a plain olive jacket, even with no medals on her chest, the weight of her rank walked with her. But in Mosswood, Louisiana, none of that mattered. She had just wrapped up a closed-door security briefing at Barksdale Air Force Base. The drive back was supposed to be quiet, 2.5 hours of back roads, pine trees, and forgotten gas stations. Nothing in her itinerary that day said trouble. But halfway through her route, the encrypted phone in her glove box chirped once, soft, sharp, and unmistakable. A code-red relay. The kind that didn't wait. The kind that didn't care where you were. Maya's eyes scanned the road. The closest place with any kind of signal was Roy's Fuel and Mart, a rundown gas station just off the highway. No cameras, no noise, just an ice machine that didn't work, and a warped picnic table with two old men parked at it, sipping from plastic cups and talking slow. It would have to do. She pulled in without drawing attention, parked near the edge of the building away from the pumps, half covered by an overgrown hedge. From inside the car, she connected the line and confirmed her identity. Trenton Maya, 4-star, command code Echo 7 Alpha. On the other end, the voice was already moving fast, briefing her on movement patterns, troop transitions, and something she wasn't supposed to hear outside secure walls. Maya barely blinked. Her posture stiffened, but her tone stayed flat. She'd been trained to carry wars in silence. From behind the counter inside the store, Doris Kemp noticed her almost immediately. Maya never saw her. She had no reason to. Just another woman working a slow shift in a slow town. But Doris saw everything. The woman outside wasn't from here. She didn't pump gas, didn't grab coffee, didn't smile. She was pacing near the car with a small black device to her ear, talking in a tone that didn't fit the sunshine. There was something about the way her eyes kept moving, like she was watching more than listening. And then there was the fact that she was black. Alone, focused, serious. That in this town drew suspicion faster than a weapon ever could. Doris narrowed her eyes. She told herself it wasn't about race. It was about behavior. The woman was acting strange, standing too close to the edge of the property, talking low and sharp like someone giving orders. Maybe it was Bluetooth. Maybe it was a walkie. Maybe she was just another angry out-of-towner who thought Mosswood was beneath her. But Doris had lived through enough post-9/11 paranoia to know one thing: if you see something, say something. She picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency line at the Mosswood Police Department. Her voice was calm, polite. "Hey, I've got a situation I think you might want to check on. There's a woman out by the side of the station. She's not pumping gas, not buying anything, just standing there on a phone I've never seen before. Real tense. Something's not right. Thought you'd want to know." The dispatcher asked a few questions: race, age, clothing. Doris answered all of them without blinking. Black female, mid-40s, civilian clothes, green jacket, real focused, just standing out there like she's waiting for something. When she hung up, she didn't feel like she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, she'd done what a responsible citizen should. She wasn't one of those types, she told herself. She didn't jump to conclusions. But there was something about the woman that didn't sit right with her gut. Outside, Maya was still on the call, nodding silently, as the voice in her earpiece updated coordinates and mission changes. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel in steady rhythm. A habit. A focus exercise. The voice on the other end paused. "General Trenton, are you secure?" Maya hesitated for a fraction of a second. She looked around. 2 trucks at the pumps. An old man with a sun hat heading inside for a soda. A girl, maybe 16, taking a smoke break by the ice chest. "Yes," she said. For now. She didn't know 2 squad cars had just pulled out of the Mosswood PD lot lights off heading her way. She didn't know her ID had already been dismissed over a phone call as probably fake. She didn't know that one woman's doubt was about to spiral into a moment that would echo all the way to the Pentagon. Because in Mosswood, uniforms mean something, unless they're worn by the wrong skin. And Maya Trenton, standing in the shadows of a gas station with no rank showing, was about to find out just how invisible power could become. The call in her ear continued, but the air around her had already started to shift. The radio buzzed just past 1:30. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a quiet note from dispatch, a woman loitering outside Roy's Fuel and Mart, acting suspicious, pacing around a vehicle talking into some kind of device. Black. Mid-40s. Looked tense. That was enough for Mosswood PD. Officer Kyle Reeves turned down the volume on the sports talk station and sat up straighter. He liked when something interrupted the usual stillness. Excitement didn't come easy in this town. And when it did, it usually looked like this. Probably nothing, he said, already reaching for his vest. Still, let's check it out. Might be worth the drive. Rick Hanley, who was older, quieter, and nearing retirement, didn't say much. He'd heard calls like this before. He knew how they started, and sometimes how they ended. Still, he turned the wheel and headed down Route 12 like he always did, steady, unbothered part of the system more than a person inside it. Back at the gas station, General Maya Trenton had less than 3 minutes to confirm a secure clearance code before the encrypted line shut down. The voice on the other end was calm, but urgent, walking her through sensitive data transfers and troop movements scheduled for early deployment. These weren't the kind of updates that could wait, nor the kind that should ever be interrupted. But something was shifting. She sensed it before she saw it. A kind of stillness fell across the air like when a patrol zone goes quiet right before contact. It was subtle. A tire crunching the loose gravel, a change in the wind. And then the silence broke with a door slam that didn't belong to the store. Reeves got out first, fast and eager. He walked like he already knew how this story would end. Hanley followed, not quite dragging his feet, but not in any rush to get there either. Maya was still seated inside her car earpiece in right hand resting over her badge wallet. She kept her voice level. General Trenton 4-star confirmation. Command channel Bravo Echo. Secure line active. Then came the knock. Sharp. Open palm. Back window. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Reeves spoke before she even turned her head. Step out of the vehicle. Maya glanced toward him. Calm. Alert. She didn't move. I'm on a classified call. I'm an active duty Army general. I have identification. Reeves laughed short and sharp. You've got an answer for everything, don't you? Hanley stood a few steps behind, scanning lazily. His hand never touched his radio. Maya kept her hands where they were. She moved slowly, deliberately, withdrawing a slim leather case from her inside jacket pocket. Here's my Pentagon clearance. You can verify it in seconds. Reeves didn't even look. He took the ID with 2 fingers like it was damp laundry, gave it the briefest glance, then tossed it across the hood of her car. Anybody can fake one of these. It's called a printer and a lamination machine. There was no anger in Maya's face, just a stillness, the kind that comes from years of watching men underestimate her. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. You're making a mistake, she said evenly. Reeves stepped in closer, narrowing the space between them. And you're making it hard on yourself. What's that in your ear? A scanner. Who are you really talking to? Behind her eyes, the countdown was ticking. The call needed her biometric reconfirmation hand scan or voice print within the next 30 seconds. If she failed to respond in time, the line would lock down, and the chain of command would be thrown into delay. This wasn't about ego. It was about lives, logistics, national readiness. She inhaled once, steady and deep. Then she replied not to the man in front of her, but to the woman on the other end of the call. Confirming status. I am currently being detained by 2 officers. Stand by. The words shifted everything. Reeves didn't like them. He didn't like not understanding who he was dealing with. And that's when things started to fray. Get out of the damn car, he snapped. Hanley muttered something behind him. Something about just checking her name and moving on. But Reeves had already decided how this was going to play out. He didn't need facts. He just needed someone to prove wrong. Maya didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just opened the door slowly and stepped out, hands visible, posture square as if she were on parade. The lot was quiet, but it wasn't empty. A teenage girl leaned against the ice machine, holding her phone low but recording. Two men at the pumps had stopped talking. Even Doris behind the counter was peeking out now. No one said a word. Maya had trained for battlefield silence. For the moments before, something breaks open and never quite goes back together again. But this wasn't a battlefield. Not yet. She didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. General Maya Trenton simply stood there, hands at her sides, eyes steady, the way she'd been taught to face a battlefield with control, with presence, with dignity. But none of that mattered. Not here. Not now. Officer Reeves didn't hesitate. The moment she stepped out of the vehicle, he grabbed her left wrist and twisted it back hard, the movement fast and deliberate, like he was handling a threat, not a human being. She tensed, but didn't cry out. Her body shifted just enough to absorb the force, but even she couldn't stop the jolt of pain that shot through her shoulder when he wrenched her other arm behind her back. The handcuffs snapped closed with a sharp metallic click that echoed across the lot. It wasn't loud, but in that moment it cut through the stillness like a warning shot. She staggered slightly, thrown off balance by the suddenness of it, and as she was forced toward the hood of her car, her head turned not in defiance, not even to plead, but simply to see who was watching. And they were watching. A teenage girl across the parking lot had her phone up now, recording in plain sight. Her hand wasn't shaking. She'd seen enough on the news to know what moments like this meant. Two older men by the pumps stood frozen, their conversations long forgotten. Inside the glass storefront, Doris Kemp gripped the counter a little tighter. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. But she didn't step outside. She didn't say a word. The only sound was the dull scrape of metal against paint as Reeves pressed Maya against the car. She didn't struggle. She didn't give him the satisfaction. And then from across the lot, a voice, small, unsure, broke the silence. "Daddy, a boy," said maybe 7, maybe 8. His hand tugging gently at the shirt of the man beside him. "Is she a bad person?" The father didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't shake his head. He just kept staring. And that silence said more than any lie ever could. Maya turned her face toward the girl, still recording, her voice low but clear, every word cut from steel. "Make sure you get this," she said. "Not for me. For the people who never had someone watching." There was no bitterness in her tone, no panic. Only the kind of sorrow that sits just beneath the surface, old, heavy, and earned. Behind her, the voice on the encrypted call crackled to life, distorted but still audible. "General Trenton." Trenton respond. "Do you copy?" But the phone had hit the pavement when Reeves pulled her from the vehicle. It lay there now, just out of reach, the light blinking in protest as the connection degraded with every second of silence. Reeves seemed oblivious, or maybe he didn't care. His job, as he saw it, was nearly done. He had a suspect in custody. He had backup, and he had an audience. What else did he need? Hanley stood back. Not close enough to be part of it. Not far enough to be innocent. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes stayed locked on the ground. Inside the store, Doris could see it all. Every movement, every word. The way Maya didn't fight back. The way she didn't shrink. The way she stared straight ahead as if she'd expected this from the moment they arrived. Doris swallowed hard. Her hand hovered near the phone, not to call again, but maybe to undo what had already been done. But she didn't move. Her feet were made of sand, her voice stuck somewhere behind regret. Out in the lot, Reeves grabbed Maya's ID from the hood and held it up in front of her face. "You want me to believe this? You really think you can flash something shiny and scare us off?" Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because right then, the secure phone on the ground gave one final burst of static before cutting off completely. The connection was gone, but someone on the other end had already heard enough. The girl with the phone was still recording. The boy beside his silent father was still watching. The world hadn't exploded yet, but something had shifted. In the air, in the stillness, in the quiet grip of one woman's restraint against another man's authority. And Maya Trenton, 4-star general, battle-hardened and battle-scarred, now stood handcuffed before a gas station wall, like a name no one cared to learn, but not for long. There's something about the sound of handcuffs clinking shut that cuts through noise like a blade. Somewhere deep inside the Pentagon's Joint Operations Center, that sound echoed through a scrambled transmission line, sharp and unmistakable. A room full of analysts went still. What started as routine data sync from General Maya Trenton's encrypted call had suddenly turned into static grunts and the unmistakable snap of steel against bone. Colonel James Calderon was the first to react. He was halfway through briefing a foreign attaché when the red light started flashing. One look at the waveform analysis and he pushed back his chair. "Confirm last GPS ping," he ordered. "If she's compromised, we need boots in motion now." "Sir," an analyst called out. "She's off Highway 171, rural Louisiana." Transmission was cut mid-verification. Last contact registered distress tones. Calderon's jaw clenched. He'd known Maya since she was a sharp cadet at West Point years before either of them carried stars on their shoulders. He turned to the room voice steady but razor-edged. "Scramble a field response team out of Barksdale. Tell them this is not a drill. I want eyes on her in 20 minutes. Back at Roy's Fuel and Mart, the sun pressed down like a weight. Maya remained upright but completely still, her wrists cuffed tightly behind her. Officer Reeves was searching her pockets now, not because of threat, but to assert control. He pulled her ID again, tossed it aside like a library card, then reached for her phone. It slipped from his hand and hit the pavement hard. The screen spiderwebbed instantly. Maya stared at the shattered glass. Not out of fear, not even anger, but something quieter. The kind of grief you feel when something sacred is broken not because of its cost, but because of what it carried. That phone wasn't just a device. It was a secure link to the nation she'd bled for, the command she carried, and the soldiers who depended on her voice. She took a shallow breath and said quietly, "You don't know who I am, but this country does, Officer Hanley." The older of the two shifted uncomfortably at those words. He wasn't a fool. He could see her bearing the calm that wasn't fear but discipline. But he didn't speak. He looked away. Inside the Pentagon, the data stream had flatlined, but the damage had already been done. Analysts had recovered enough audio to confirm Maya Trenton's call had been interrupted during classified briefings. They had recorded not only her voice, but the shouted orders of someone else, the metallic scuffle, and the unmistakable insult. "This ID's fake." One of the senior analysts leaned back in her chair. "She doesn't need to be rescued," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "She needs to be recognized." At that moment, Calderon stood silent in front of a digital map, a blinking red dot hovering over a small blue dot labeled Mosswood. He could feel the weight of the moment. The press would call it overreach. The locals might call it a misunderstanding. But he knew better. Maya hadn't failed protocol. Protocol had failed her. He spoke again, this time more personal. "No weapons drawn unless absolutely necessary. She's not the threat. The threat is already wearing badges." Back at the gas station, Maya remained motionless. Her face was unreadable, but her silence screamed louder than protest. Around her, people had gathered. Phones were up. Faces were shifting from curiosity to confusion, and for some, to shame. One little girl no older than 10 clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "Why are they doing that to her?" No one answered. Inside the store, Doris watched it all unfold through the dusty front window. Her hand still rested near the phone she had used to call the police. Something about the way Maya stood dignified even in humiliation made her hesitate for the first time. But still, she said nothing. From the cracked phone on the pavement, a voice filtered through, tinny but urgent. "General Trenton. This is command. Do you copy?" Reeves kicked the phone aside. "She's not answering," he said to no one in particular. And still Maya didn't move. Far away in a steel room glowing with monitors, Calderon watched the screen go dark. "I'm done waiting," he said. "Get them there, now." And with that, the gears of something much larger began to turn. The rescue team was less than 5 miles out when the Mosswood checkpoint came into view. A line of local cruisers blocked the 2-lane road lights, flashing not in welcome, but in defiance. Captain Harris of Barksdale leaned out the Humvee window holding up federal clearance codes, but the officer at the barrier barely looked. "You'll need to turn back," he said flatly. "We've got an active situation, already being handled by local law enforcement." Sir Harris replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "We're operating under direct Pentagon authority. The individual you're detaining is—" The officer cut him off. "Look, I don't care who sent you. We have a suspicious individual on private property. Until we get confirmation, no one passes through." Those next 3 minutes would stretch like hours. Back at the Pentagon, Colonel Calderon was pacing. Every delay, every obstruction only made his voice harder when he finally snapped. Then bypassed their protocol. "I want full military identification override, now." The tech team didn't hesitate. One of the youngest analysts, a wiry red-haired coder named Devon, cracked open the authentication framework and dove into the legacy clearance logs. Maya's service records were encrypted under an outdated schema, part of a blackout operation 10 years prior. That wasn't just a clearance issue. It was a ghost file. Nearly invisible unless you knew where to dig. "I've got it," Devon said, typing faster now. "General Maya A. Trenton. Confirmed deployment history. 5 classified theaters. Clearance level Echo Black." The room went silent for half a second. "Upload to field units. Bypass civilian comms." "This doesn't go through local dispatch," Calderon said. Meanwhile, outside Roy's Fuel and Mart, the air had shifted. The tension wasn't just thick, it was turning. The crowd had grown, and though no one had intervened yet, the whispering had started to rise above the wind. "She's not even resisting," one man said to his wife. "I've seen her before," another woman muttered. "That's the lady from that award ceremony last year. The one the president shook hands with." Someone finally said it louder. "She's a soldier." Officer Reeves didn't look up. He was still standing beside Maya, one hand on his holster like she might try something even now. Across the parking lot, Hanley turned, slightly eyeing the growing discomfort in the crowd. For the first time, he looked unsure. And Maya, she hadn't moved. Her wrists still bound behind her back, her gaze still forward. But inside, she could feel it, the pulse of something shifting. A wind turning direction. Not fast enough. Not yet. But turning. Then the radio on Hanley's chest crackled. "Dispatch to all units. Be advised, subject flagged Federal. Immediate release authorized. Repeat flagged. Federal do not engage. Acknowledge." Silence. Hanley froze. Reeves's jaw tightened. What the hell does that mean? But the crowd had already heard. "She told you someone called out. She told you who she was." Maya finally turned her head ever so slightly. Her voice was calm, almost tired. "You didn't just detain me," she said. "You delayed a classified mission. You blocked federal response. And you embarrassed the country you claim to serve." Her words didn't shout, but they echoed. Not just across the lot, but deep into the bones of every person who had watched and stayed silent. At the checkpoint, the barriers finally dropped. But the damage, that was already done. Maya didn't move when they uncuffed her. She didn't rub her wrists or straighten her shoulders. She simply stood still, her spine already straight, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the gas station lot. Because in that moment, her mind was no longer in Mosswood. It had drifted to another place. Another time where the weight of being a black woman in uniform had nearly broken her before. She had been a newly promoted major then. The ink on her credentials was still fresh when a state trooper pulled her over just outside Fort Campbell. Her firearm was secured in the glove box, legal logged and permitted. But when she stepped out of the vehicle, the uniform didn't matter. Not to them. Not when her skin and silence told them a story they were already ready to believe. They questioned her for hours, poking at her ID, doubting the serial number on her weapon, even asking why someone like her talked that way. She was thrown into a holding room. 12 hours. No phone call. No explanation. Just fluorescent lights, a metal bench, and a silence she knew too well. Maya remembered how she stared at the clock, watching each minute fall like a grain of sand. She remembered how she refused to sit down, refused to bow her head. She stood the entire time, arms crossed like a soldier at attention. That night had followed her everywhere. So did the words her mother had told her years before, "Keep your back straight, baby." When you lower your head, they don't see humility, they see guilt, even when you've done nothing wrong. Those words had become a kind of armor. Maya had carried them into briefing rooms, into command tents, onto foreign soil, into situations where one wrong breath could mean the difference between life and death. And now she carried them here to a dusty parking lot in the middle of her own country, where silence still had to do all the talking. Inside the store, behind the smudged glass, Doris hadn't moved. But something inside her had. Her arms were no longer crossed defensively, but held tightly at her chest. She watched the officers linger near Maya. She watched the woman on the pavement not cry, not yell, not even speak. And it shook something loose. Doris found herself thinking about a picture magneted to her refrigerator at home. Her daughter Beth in uniform, smiling beside a woman she had once called the toughest boss I've ever had. The woman had been black, tall, calm, dignified. Beth had admired her, trusted her. Now, Doris looked at Maya, blood on her temple phone, shattered at her feet, and still somehow more composed than anyone else in the scene. She hadn't asked for sympathy. She hadn't even defended herself. And for the first time, Doris wondered if what she saw earlier, a woman standing in the corner lot speaking into a device with sharp urgency, wasn't suspicious at all. Maybe it was just someone trying to do her job, a job Doris couldn't begin to understand. Outside, Maya looked into the glass door of the station, not at the store, not at Doris, at her own reflection. It wasn't vanity. It was a moment of reckoning. Her face was bruised, one eye starting to swell, and blood traced the corner of her lip. But her expression didn't tremble. It stayed calm, restrained, impossibly still. No tears, just that unbroken stare, that same stillness she had learned to carry like a weapon. She reached down slowly, fingers brushing broken glass as she picked up her phone. The screen was useless now, just a spiderweb of black and silver cracks. But one thing stood out. Across the top, streaked in red, was the blood from her own hand. A clean swipe, an unintentional marking. She looked at it and thought, this didn't happen in a war zone. This happened here, at home, where I once took an oath to protect everyone standing here, even those who don't see me as worth protecting. She clutched the phone, holding it like something sacred, even in its ruined state. Her mind flicked back just for a second to a young private she'd once pulled from a burning vehicle in Kandahar. He'd been barely 21, white panicked and screaming. She'd dragged him out by the belt and shielded his body with her own. He survived. He sent her a letter the year after, called her a hero. No one here seemed to think she was anything close to that. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become something else entirely now, a form of resistance of testimony, the kind that doesn't ask for attention but commands it anyway. Inside, Doris took a breath, not the kind that clears the air, but the kind that lets the air back in after you realize you've been holding it too long. Her eyes moved to her cell phone on the counter. For a second, her fingers twitched toward it, but she pulled her hand back. Something in her didn't know who to call anymore. And somewhere behind them, just beyond the curve of the road, the hum of tires approached, low, steady, and unmistakably deliberate. Something or someone was coming. And this time it wasn't coming to arrest her. It was coming to answer for her. They didn't need sirens. They didn't need to shout. When the military convoy arrived, it didn't announce itself. It simply appeared. 3 matte black SUVs pulled into the lot like a wave of shadow rolling over the pavement. No screeching tires, no chaos. Just a quiet force that made the entire street hold its breath. Doors opened in perfect sync. The air seemed to still. Out stepped Colonel James Calderon. His presence didn't scream power. It whispered it with the kind of authority that made people instinctively move aside. His uniform was sharp, marked with the weight of wars fought and won, but his expression was colder than any rank stitched onto his chest. He looked once at Maya Trenton. She stood in the heat, still cuffed her wrists red and raw, her jaw set like stone. Her eyes met his, calm but burning. She hadn't said a word since they threw her against that car, but she didn't need to. Her silence had already spoken for her. Calderon turned to the 2 officers, Reeves and Hanley. "Uncuff her," he said, voice low but absolute. Reeves blinked. "Sir, we didn't know who she was. She wasn't complying." "You didn't know," Calderon repeated. "Because you didn't ask. You didn't listen. And now you're standing in front of a decorated general and about 3 federal lawsuits." Hanley opened his mouth to defend, but Calderon didn't wait. "The only thing you should be doing now is unlocking those cuffs and praying her silence doesn't become your reckoning." Reeves fumbled with the key, and the cuffs popped open. Maya's arms dropped slowly, her hands tingling as blood returned to her fingers. She didn't rub her wrists. She didn't flinch. She simply raised her eyes and looked Reeves in the face. "I've been detained before," she said quietly, "but never by someone who claimed to wear the same flag." The words weren't loud, but the silence afterward was deafening. She turned to Calderon. "Permission to rejoin command." He gave a single nod. granted, but she didn't move just yet. Instead, she faced the small crowd that had gathered: locals, store employees, a few teenagers with phones, and a mother clutching her child. All of them had watched it happen. Most had said nothing. Maya raised her voice not to yell, but so no one could pretend they didn't hear. I didn't say anything earlier because I needed you to see it. See what happens when someone looks like me, even when I outrank the people holding the cuffs. I'm not the story, but this moment is. Because next time, it won't be a general. It'll be someone with no title to shout for them. Her eyes swept the lot. No one moved, not even Doris inside the store. And then she walked. Past the officers, past the silence. Her back straight, her head high, her wrists bruised, but her dignity untouched. The moment her boot touched the step of the SUV, a young boy tugged at his father's shirt. "Is she a hero?" the boy asked. His father didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Inside the vehicle, Calderon remained outside a second longer, then turned to Reeves and said, "You're going to remember her face for the rest of your career." He climbed in beside her and the doors closed. As the SUVs pulled away, someone in the crowd started to record again, and this time the whole country would be watching. It started with a single clip, shaky, unedited, filmed from a phone halfway behind a gas pump. General Maya Trenton on her knees, wrists cuffed, her head held high while two white officers towered over her like she was a captured enemy. No screaming, no resistance, just that cold, unmistakable sound of authority being dragged across the pavement. And then boom, the internet detonated. By the time the Barksdale unit made it back to base, the video had already gone viral. 10 million views in under 3 hours. Then 20, then 30. Major veteran groups reshared it with captions like, "This is not how you treat a soldier." But that was the mild response. Others were furious. In barbershops, people cursed at TV screens. In living rooms, families watched with disbelief as their morning news anchors replayed the video on loop. Maya's face, bruised, silent, became the center of a storm nobody saw coming. And the silence. That was what hit the hardest. She didn't beg. She didn't fight. She just endured it. The rage wasn't only about what happened. It was about who it happened to. A war hero. A woman with more stars on her shoulder than most men in that town had respect to give. And when one conservative cable network tried to spin the story, perhaps the officers were just doing their job. The pushback was immediate. Viewers canceled subscriptions live on air. A retired Navy SEAL called in and said, "I've served with Maya Trenton." You wouldn't last 5 minutes in her boots. At noon the same day, a national press conference was called, not by the government, but by the people who had once worn the same uniform as Maya. Retired generals, battle-tested colonels, even a Medal of Honor recipient. They stood side by side, not smiling, not shaking hands, just standing. Then came the words, "This country trains warriors to lead with discipline. What you saw in that video is not restraint. It's wrought from a system that doesn't recognize its own heroes unless they look a certain way." The crowd went still. Meanwhile, back in Mosswood, the town began to choke on the very silence it had used to cover its shame. News trucks lined the streets. Protesters gathered outside the police department. And Doris, the store clerk who had started it all, watched it unfold from behind her counter, eyes locked on the screen. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. And sometime around 3 a.m. she made a decision. She logged into her personal email, attached the full surveillance footage from the store, and sent it to a local journalist who'd been digging into Mosswood PD for years. No explanation, no excuses, just a short note. "Here's what really happened. I was wrong." The footage blew open everything. The public had seen the takedown. But now they saw what led to it. Maya hadn't looked suspicious. She hadn't shouted, moved aggressively, or threatened anyone. She stood near her car, quiet-focused, relaying something over a secure line. A military-grade comms device. That was it. There was no suspicious movement, no threatening behavior, just a black woman in civilian clothes doing her job until someone decided that was too much. Online, the pressure exploded. Justice for Trenton climbed to #1 on every major platform. Petitions hit 1 million signatures in under 12 hours. Anonymous sources leaked that the Pentagon had already begun internal review procedures. Meanwhile, the Mosswood PD website went dark, flooded by public outrage. And Maya. She stayed silent. Every major network begged for an interview. Every politician wanted her to stand beside them. Every publication wrote op-eds titled "The General Who Said Nothing." But all she said through a written statement released by her office was this: "Let the footage speak." And it did, louder than any speech, louder than any press release. It spoke in every home where someone had been profiled, overlooked, or humiliated. It spoke for soldiers who came home only to be questioned. It spoke for black women who are expected to be strong but not too strong. And as America watched it unfold, it didn't just see one woman being mistreated. It saw a mirror. And for the first time in a long time, the reflection made people uncomfortable enough to act. The auditorium at Barksdale wasn't glamorous. No banners, no music, no patriotic slogans printed on cloth. Just rows of folding chairs, muted uniforms, and cameras rolling quietly from the back wall. They had gathered for her not because of the title she carried, but because of the silence she had held. And now she had chosen to break it. General Maya Trenton stood before the podium in her service uniform, the ribbons and bars neatly aligned across her chest. Her face was healed mostly, but the faint bruising near her jaw was still there, refusing to disappear, as if to remind the room that this wasn't a ceremony, it was a reckoning. She didn't speak immediately. She let the room breathe. Let the anticipation settle until you could feel it in your teeth. And then, without a script, without glancing once at the teleprompter, she said, "I didn't stand still because I was afraid. I stood still because I refused to kneel." The words didn't echo, they landed. Heavy, deliberate, final. She paused, letting them sink in, her eyes scanning the sea of faces in front of her. Soldiers, veterans, journalists, some in suits, some in uniform, some holding back tears they didn't even realize were rising. "I have served this country for 27 years, she continued, in places where the heat could cook the soles off your boots, in war zones where you don't know if the ground beneath you is wired to explode, and in offices where a woman like me was called sir until they saw my face. There were no gasps, just stillness. I have walked into meetings where no one offered me a chair. I have handed over my ID and watched men tilt their heads like they were trying to solve a puzzle. And I have been asked more times than I care to count if I was really a general." She stopped again, but not because she was tired. I wasn't silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because every word from me would have been twisted, every shout dismissed as anger, every protest labeled defiance. So I let them write their assumptions across my skin, hoping the truth would outlast the noise. She placed both hands on the podium, now steadying herself. Her voice didn't rise, but it deepened, took on a steadiness that couldn't be shaken. "I am not standing here for Maya Trenton. This isn't about me. It never was." A murmur stirred in the crowd, but faded just as quickly. "I speak now for those who were never given a microphone. For the soldiers passed over for promotion because their name was too hard to pronounce. For the women who were told to smile more in combat zones. For the kids who watched their parents get pulled over again and again and wondered if they'd done something wrong just by existing." There was a rustle in the back row, a shifting of boots. Someone coughed quietly. Maya didn't blink. For every man who wore a uniform and came home to suspicion. For every woman who was questioned twice once for being black and again for being brave. For every voice that was filtered through doubt before it ever reached a desk. She leaned in slightly. "You don't have to wear stars to be seen. But in this country it seems some of us have to wear scars to be believed." And then silence. The kind that grips a room from the inside. For a moment no one moved. Then, from the far right of the room, a young soldier in digital fatigues, barely out of his 20s, stood up and clapped once. Loud, firm, like a single firecracker breaking dawn. Then again, and again. Until another joined. And another. And within seconds the room wasn't clapping, they were rising. A wave of applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from something too deep to be taught. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't nod like a politician soaking in praise. She just stood there, hands behind her back, letting the sound wash over her like a salute. And if you looked close, you'd see it just beneath the steel in her expression, something breaking loose. Not a tear. Not quite. But something human. And that was the moment America stopped seeing her as a victim. and started recognizing her as a mirror. As the applause faded and the cameras were slowly powered down, Maya stepped down from the podium, not quickly, not triumphantly, but with a quiet grace that carried more weight than any marching cadence. Her boots touched the ground like she'd never left it. And just as she reached the side of the stage, a little girl, no older than 8 or 9, stood up from the front row. She wore a simple sundress, her braids tied neatly with sky-blue ribbons. And without saying a word, she raised her right hand in a crisp military salute, her small fingers held straight and strong. Maya paused. She looked at the girl not through her, not past her, but into her. And in that single breath, she didn't smile or tear up. She simply returned the gesture with a gentle nod, her chin dipping ever so slightly like two soldiers who had never met, but somehow recognized each other in the silence. Miles away behind a locked door and drawn curtains, Doris sat curled on the edge of her couch, eyes red, hands trembling over the remote. The press conference played out on her old television, the same one that had shown war zones, storm warnings, and soap operas. Now it was showing her a woman she had once misjudged so badly it kept her up at night. The moment Maya spoke of the unheard, Doris had started crying. But not the dramatic kind. The kind that sneaks up on you and doesn't ask permission. Her daughter had once served in uniform too, under a black commanding officer, and Doris had never questioned that woman's leadership. Until the day Maya walked into her gas station and her fear had shouted louder than her memory. She wiped her eyes, but the tears just kept coming. Not out of guilt anymore, out of clarity. Back at the base, the skies had turned a pale gold, the kind that stretches across the afternoon like a promise you're not sure will be kept. Maya didn't head inside with the others. She didn't return to briefings or meetings or paperwork. She walked out onto the grass past the line where cameras stopped following past where the questions had ended, and only the quiet remained. She took off her cap, folded it under one arm, and looked down at her hands. Her wrists still carried faint marks. Not deep, not bleeding, but there. Red, raised, real. She touched them gently, thumb brushing the inside of her left wrist where the cuff had bitten down just hours before. And then her eyes lifted toward the sky, that golden sky stretching wide above the airbase that had always been her second home. People kept asking if justice had been served. But justice, she knew, didn't come marching in with headlines or handcuffs. It didn't arrive on sirens or in speeches. It didn't wear medals or pass out blame like candy. Justice sometimes was just the choice to speak when it would be easier to stay silent. Sometimes it was choosing to remember what hurt even when the world begged you to forget. And sometimes justice didn't ride in at all. Sometimes it just waited. Waited to see who would carry the weight when the noise had faded. As she stood there, wind brushing across the field like breath itself, Maya said nothing aloud, but one sentence hovered just behind her ribs, pressing outward like the beat of a drum. Some scars are medals. You just don't get to choose who gives them. She let the thought settle, not to be quoted, not to be printed, just known, and then she walked, not toward the past, not toward the press, but forward, as always. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't loud, they're quiet. A woman in handcuffs, a child watching, a country holding its breath. Maya's story reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands still and lets the world see the truth for itself. This wasn't just about injustice. It was about identity, silence, and what it costs to carry dignity through humiliation. And it's a reminder that even when justice arrives late, the memory of injustice walks ahead of it. If this story spoke to you, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful real-life stories that deserve to be heard. Your support keeps this channel alive. It gives us the strength to keep digging, keep telling, and keep remembering. Because at Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell stories, we honor the truth behind them. Let's not forget what happened here. And now let's go back to the beginning.